Good evening. Welcome into Newsletter 9 at 6. I'm Jason Dennis.
And I'm Barbara Goche. Thank you so much for joining us. Our top story tonight, new details surrounding a domestic violence case where Columbus police say a man ambushed his ex-girlfriend, leaving her for dead.
Authorities say 50-year-old Felito Daniel broke into his ex-girlfriend Laticia Walton's apartment, shot her twice, and stabbed her 37 times.
The sound of a 911 dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone line. 911, what's your emergency? On the other end, barely able to speak, a woman whispered through labored breaths. Blood pooled around her as she pressed the phone to her ear with trembling hands. The date was January 17, 2025. Just moments earlier, 48-year-old Laticia Walton had been fighting for her life in her apartment at Sugar Mill Apartments in Columbus, Georgia. Now, with 37 stab wounds across her body and 2 bullets lodged inside her, one in her face and another in her shoulder, she had somehow found the strength to reach for her phone. Welcome to Shadows of Crime. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story you're about to hear defies medical explanation and reveals the extraordinary lengths humans will go to survive. When Columbus police officers arrived at the scene, they found something that shocked even veteran law enforcement. Outside the apartment complex stood a man covered in antifreeze, with zip ties around his neck, his clothes soaked in blood. This was 50-year-old Felito Daniel, Leticia's ex-boyfriend of 6 years. Inside the apartment, officers discovered a scene that one family member would later describe as like something from a horror movie. The knife wounds alone should have been fatal. The gunshot to the face should have been impossible to survive. Yet somehow, Leticia was still breathing. What happened in that apartment on that January afternoon wasn't a random act of violence. It wasn't a crime of passion. According to investigators, it was something far more disturbing. A meticulously planned attack designed to end Leticia's life. Hours before arriving at Sugar Mill Apartments, Daniel had been shopping. His purchases? A chef's knife, zip ties, antifreeze. Each item carefully selected for a specific purpose in his deadly plan. But what Daniel couldn't plan for was Leticia's will to live. In the moments after being repeatedly stabbed and shot, she made a decision that would ultimately save her life. She pretended to be dead until her attacker left. What drives someone to plan such a brutal attack against someone they once claimed to love? How did Leticia find the strength to not only survive but to call for help? And what warning signs might have predicted this horrific violence? The answers lie in a relationship that had ended nearly a year earlier, or at least was supposed to have ended. Laticia Walton was, by all accounts, an extraordinary woman, even before her survival made national headlines. At 48 years old, the Columbus, Georgia resident had built a life characterized by kindness and resilience. Those who knew her best described Leticia as a kind and selfless person, bringing light and love to everyone she meets, a description that would take on profound meaning in the aftermath of what happened to her. Despite being in her late 40s, Leticia maintained a youthful appearance that often surprised people. After photos of her circulated following the attack, social media users expressed astonishment, with one commenting, "She looks amazing for 48. This wasn't by accident. Leticia was dedicated to her physical health and made fitness a priority in her daily routine, regularly attending the gym to stay in shape. As a mother, Leticia had built her life around caring for others. While the specific details about her children remain private in the available information, her role as a mother was central to her identity. This nurturing spirit extended beyond her immediate family, touching the lives of friends and community members who came to know her generous nature. At the center of Leticia's support system was her sister Tika Ferguson. The bond between the sisters was evident in how fiercely Tika advocated for Leticia in the aftermath of the attack. When Leticia was unable to appear in court due to her injuries, it was Tika who stood before Judge David Ranieri to speak on her behalf, giving voice to her sister's suffering and the family's anguish. The sisters shared the kind of connection where even unspoken thoughts were communicated. When Tika received the frantic call from her nephew about the attack, her world stopped. "It's truly been a nightmare from the moment that I received a call from my nephew, screaming, saying that my sister had been stabbed, then shot," Tika would later tell the court. "I truly did not know if my sister was alive or not." What makes Leticia's story particularly striking is the stark contrast between the life she had built and the violence that would suddenly tear through it. The woman who brought light and love to everyone she met became the target of darkness and hatred. The body she had carefully maintained through regular exercise would be pushed to its absolute limits of endurance. The home that should have been her refuge became the site of unimaginable horror. Perhaps most poignant is how Leticia's character, her strength, her resilience, her quick thinking would ultimately save her life. The same qualities that made her exceptional in everyday life would prove crucial in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. No one who knew Leticia could have predicted what awaited her on that January afternoon. No one could have imagined that this ordinary woman with an extraordinary spirit would soon become known for something else entirely. Surviving what should have been unsurvivable. As Leticia went about her life in early 2025, she had no way of knowing that her ex-boyfriend of 6 years was harboring thoughts of violence that would soon explode into a premeditated attack designed to end her life. For 6 years, Laticia Walton and Filetto Danielle moved through life together in an on-again, off-again relationship that would ultimately end in violence. While the exact circumstances of how they met remain undocumented in the available information, what began as a romantic connection evolved into something far more complex and eventually dangerous. At 50 years old, Daniel was slightly older than the 48-year-old Leticia. From the outside, they might have appeared to be a typical couple navigating the normal ups and downs of a long-term relationship. But beneath the surface, patterns were forming that would later be recognized as warning signs. Their relationship followed a cycle familiar to many who study domestic violence. Periods of apparent normalcy punctuated by breaks and reconciliations. Friends and family would later describe Leticia as a victim of domestic violence, suggesting that the relationship had shown troubling signs long before the final, brutal attack. Like many relationships that turn abusive, the problematic dynamics likely developed gradually. Research shows that controlling behaviors often escalate over time, becoming increasingly restrictive and dangerous. While specific incidents from their earlier relationship aren't detailed in the available information, the eventual outcome suggests a pattern of escalating control and abuse. By February 2024, Leticia had reached her breaking point. After years of cycling through problems and reconciliations, she made the decision that many domestic violence victims find most difficult. She ended the relationship permanently. According to reports, she told Daniel in no uncertain terms that she was sick and tired of his bullshit and she wanted out of the relationship. This wasn't just a verbal declaration. Leticia took concrete steps to establish boundaries, including reclaiming her apartment key from Daniel. This seemingly small act carried enormous symbolic weight. It was a physical representation of her determination to close this chapter of her life and move forward independently. For many victims of domestic violence, this moment of separation represents both freedom and danger. Experts recognize that the period immediately following a breakup is often the most perilous time for victims, as abusers face the loss of control they've worked to maintain. For nearly a year after the breakup, life appeared to move forward. Leticia continued her routine at the Sugar Mill Apartments, going to work, visiting the gym, and spending time with family. From February 2024 until January 2025, there was, perhaps, a sense that the worst was behind her. that the difficult decision to end the relationship had been successfully navigated. What wasn't visible was what was happening with Felido Daniel during those 11 months. While Leticia was rebuilding her life, Daniel was apparently unable to accept the finality of their separation. The relationship that had defined 6 years of his life was over, and with it, his sense of control over Leticia. For some individuals, this loss of control triggers a dangerous response. Rather than accepting the end of the relationship and moving forward, they become fixated on regaining control by any means necessary. When persuasion fails, when manipulation fails, when threats fail, violence can become the final attempt to assert dominance. The 11 months between the breakup and the attack represent a critical period that domestic violence researchers call separation assault, the increased risk of violence that occurs when an abuser realizes their partner has truly left. During this time, Daniel's thoughts apparently turned from reconciliation to revenge. What Leticia couldn't have known was that Daniel's inability to accept the breakup would eventually transform into a meticulously planned attack. The man who had once been her partner was now plotting her murder, selecting weapons and preparing to ambush her in what should have been the safety of her own home. As January 2025 began, Leticia had no way of knowing that Daniel's resentment had festered into something deadly. She couldn't have anticipated that nearly a year after reclaiming her key and her independence, she would face the ultimate test of her will to survive. January 17, 2025 began as an ordinary Friday in Columbus, Georgia. For most residents, it was simply the end of a work week, perhaps the beginning of weekend plans. For Felido Daniel, however, it was the day he had chosen to execute a plan months in the making. In the hours before he arrived at Sugar Mill Apartments, Daniel moved methodically through Columbus, visiting multiple stores. Security footage would later confirm what police suspected. This was no impulsive act of violence. At each stop, Daniel purchased items with specific, deadly purposes in mind. A chef's knife with a sharp, sturdy blade. Zip ties, versatile tools for restraint. A bottle of antifreeze, toxic if ingested. We've identified multiple stores in Columbus, Georgia, where Mr. Daniel shopped before arriving at Sugar Mill Apartments. Sergeant Sherman Hayes would later testify. He bought items such as zip ties, antifreeze, and the knife used to stab Ms. Walton. But Daniel already possessed perhaps the most lethal item in his arsenal, a .22 caliber revolver that investigators would later discover had been reported stolen in Texas. How and when Daniel acquired this weapon remains unclear, but its presence completed his deadly toolkit. Around 2 p.m., Daniel made his move. Despite no longer having a key to Leticia's apartment, the key she had reclaimed nearly a year earlier, he managed to break in. The exact method of entry isn't detailed in the available information, but what's clear is that Leticia had no warning, no chance to escape or call for help before the attack began. When Leticia entered her apartment that afternoon, she had no idea that Daniel was lying in wait. According to Sergeant Hayes, she was fighting for her life from the moment she entered her apartment. What followed was an attack of almost unimaginable brutality. Daniel launched himself at Leticia with the chef's knife, stabbing her repeatedly, not once or twice in a moment of rage, but 37 separate times in a sustained assault that demonstrated his intent to ensure she wouldn't survive. The locations of these wounds aren't specified in the reports, but the sheer number speaks to the ferocity of the attack. As if the stabbing wasn't enough, Daniel then drew the stolen revolver and shot Leticia twice, once in the face and once in the shoulder. Either of these gunshot wounds could have been fatal on their own. Combined with the 37 stab wounds, it seemed impossible that anyone could survive such an assault. Yet in this moment of extreme trauma, Leticia made a decision that would ultimately save her life. Drawing on instincts and quick thinking that few of us will ever need to access, she went completely still and pretended to be dead. Despite her catastrophic injuries and the overwhelming pain she must have been experiencing, Leticia understood that her only chance of survival was to convince Daniel that he had succeeded in killing her. The strategy worked. Believing he had accomplished his goal, Daniel left Leticia bleeding on the floor and exited the apartment. If you're finding this story as incredible as I do, take a moment right now to hit the like button and share this video. Stories like Leticia's need to be heard, not just for the remarkable survival aspect, but for the awareness they bring to domestic violence and its potentially deadly consequences. What happened next demonstrated Leticia's extraordinary will to live. As soon as Daniel left, despite having 37 stab wounds and 2 gunshot wounds, she somehow found the strength to reach for her phone and dial 911. Then, showing remarkable presence of mind, she managed to lock herself in the apartment to prevent Daniel from returning to finish what he had started. The 911 dispatcher who took Laticia Walton's call that January afternoon heard something few ever do. The voice of someone who, by all medical understanding, should not have been able to speak at all. With 37 stab wounds penetrating her body and 2 bullet wounds, including one to her face, Leticia's ability to make that call defies explanation. Each word she managed to communicate required overcoming extraordinary pain and blood loss that would have rendered most people unconscious, if not dead. The call itself was brief and desperate. Leticia could only provide the most essential information, her location and the fact that she had been attacked. Her voice was likely barely audible, each syllable requiring tremendous effort as she fought to remain conscious long enough to secure help. That single act, reaching for her phone and dialing those 3 numbers, represents perhaps the most crucial decision in her survival story. When Columbus police officers arrived at Sugar Mill Apartments, they encountered a scene that would test even the most experienced first responders. Inside Leticia's apartment, they found her clinging to life, surrounded by evidence of the frenzied attack. The amount of blood loss alone should have been fatal. Emergency medical technicians immediately recognized the severity of her condition. Multiple stab wounds throughout her body, a gunshot wound to her face, and another to her shoulder. Outside the apartment complex, officers made a discovery that completed the picture of what had transpired. They found Fladella Daniel in a disturbing state, his clothes saturated with blood, his body covered in antifreeze, and zip ties fastened around his neck. The items he had purchased earlier that day had served their intended purposes: the knife for attacking Leticia, and the antifreeze and zip ties for his own suicide attempt. Daniel's suicide attempt, like his murder attempt, had failed. The antifreeze he had ingested and the zip ties he had secured around his neck had not accomplished their purpose. Police took him into custody at the scene, his blood-soaked clothing providing immediate evidence of his connection to the attack inside the apartment. Meanwhile, emergency medical personnel faced the daunting task of stabilizing Leticia enough for transport. With catastrophic blood loss and trauma to multiple body systems, every moment was critical. They worked rapidly to establish IV lines, control bleeding where possible, and prepare her for the short but potentially fatal journey to Piedmont Columbus Regional Hospital. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a race against time. Paramedics continued life-saving measures en route, fighting to keep Leticia's failing body systems functioning. Her blood pressure would have been dangerously low, her breathing likely compromised, and the risk of her heart stopping was significant with each passing minute. Upon arrival at Piedmont Columbus Regional, Leticia was immediately classified as a critical trauma patient. The emergency department would have activated their highest level of response, with trauma surgeons, emergency physicians, anesthesiologists, and specialized nurses converging to address her catastrophic injury. The initial medical assessment would have been grim. Medical literature documents few cases of survival after such extensive trauma. The combination of blood loss, organ damage, and the physiological stress of such severe injuries creates a cascade of failure that medical intervention often cannot overcome. Yet somehow, against overwhelming odds, Leticia survived those first critical hours. As medical teams worked through emergency surgeries and interventions, she demonstrated a physiological resilience that amazed even veteran trauma specialists. While her condition remained critical, the fact that she survived the initial day following the attack represented a medical anomaly that would soon capture national attention. As Laticia Walton fought for her life at Piedmont Columbus Regional, Columbus police began piecing together the events that led to the January 17 attack. What emerged from their investigation wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence, but something far more disturbing: a meticulously planned attempt to end Leticia's life. Sergeant Sherman Hayes led the investigation, which quickly uncovered evidence of Daniel's preparations. Security footage and transaction records revealed Daniel's movements in the hours before the attack, showing him purchasing the chef's knife and other items at various stores throughout Columbus. Perhaps most concerning was the weapon used to shoot Leticia, a .22 caliber revolver that investigators determined had been reported stolen in Texas. "We believe the gun was something he already possessed," Sergeant Hayes noted, suggesting Daniel had acquired the weapon well before the day of the attack. This detail added another layer to the case, connecting Daniel not just to the assault, but potentially to interstate theft of a firearm. The evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. Daniel hadn't just attacked Leticia in a moment of anger. He had planned the assault, gathered the necessary tools, and executed his plan with chilling deliberation. Each step revealed a calculated approach to ensure Leticia wouldn't survive. On January 20, 2025, just 3 days after the attack, Falato Daniel made his first court appearance before Recorder's Court Judge David Ranieri. Daniel faced initial charges of aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime, and possession of a knife during the commission of a crime. Charges that some observers felt didn't fully capture the severity of his actions. Leticia remained hospitalized in critical condition, unable to attend the court proceedings. In her place, her sister Tika Ferguson stood before Judge Ranieri to give an emotional statement that conveyed the devastating impact of Daniel's actions on Leticia and their entire family. "It's truly been a nightmare from the moment that I received a call from my nephew screaming saying that my sister had been stabbed, then shot," Ferguson told the court, her voice breaking with emotion. "I truly did not know if my sister was alive or not. Everybody in the family is suffering due to this senseless act. Most importantly, Tisha is clearly suffering the most." Ferguson's statement revealed another dimension to the case when she conveyed a message directly from Leticia. Despite her critical condition, Leticia had asked her sister to tell the court that Daniel wasn't the only one to blame for the violent incident. Ferguson directly called out Daniel's family, which she said had enabled his behavior. The courtroom fell silent as Ferguson described the horror of what had happened to her sister. "It truly feels like a scene from a horror movie," she said, capturing the almost unbelievable brutality of the attack. Following the testimony and review of evidence, Judge Ranieri made a decisive ruling. Calling Daniel a serious threat, he ordered that the defendant be held without bond on all counts. The judge's decision reflected the gravity of the case and the clear danger Daniel posed to Leticia and potentially others. In addition to the original charges, Judge Ranieri updated the charges to include burglary in the first degree and receiving stolen property, acknowledging that Daniel had illegally entered Leticia's apartment and possessed a stolen firearm. These additional charges strengthened the case against Daniel and reflected the multiple criminal acts involved in the attack. At the conclusion of the hearing, Judge Ranieri bowed the case over to Superior Court, where more serious felony cases are adjudicated. This procedural move signaled that the case would proceed to the next level of the judicial system, where Daniel would potentially face additional charges and a trial that could result in decades of imprisonment. As the legal proceedings advanced, Leticia remained in the hospital, beginning what would be a long and arduous recovery process. The investigation had established the premeditated nature of the attack, but the question of how anyone could survive such brutality remained a medical mystery that continued to astonish healthcare providers. The medical challenges facing Laticia Walton in the days and weeks following the attack were monumental. Each of the 37 stab wounds represented its own trauma, potentially damaging organs, blood vessels, and tissues. The gunshot wound to her face presented particularly complex challenges for her medical team, threatening her airway, facial structure, and neurological function. The second gunshot to her shoulder added yet another serious injury requiring specialized care. Despite the severity of her condition, Leticia demonstrated remarkable resilience. In March 2025, approximately 2 months after the attack, she reached a milestone that few had thought possible. She spoke publicly for the first time.
Hello everyone. This is my very first time coming on to TikTok since my incident. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, but on January the 17th this year, I was involved in an incident where I was shot twice, once in the face, once in the back, and I was stabbed 37 times. If this video doesn't send any message other than to let you know, I am still here, which means there is a God. My doctors all tell me that I am a walking miracle. So I just want to come on to let you know. I know people go through things, so I just want to let you know that there is a God, all right?
Her message was simple but profound. I am still here. These 4 words, delivered while still recovering from catastrophic injuries, captured both the miracle of her survival and her determination to reclaim her life. As news of Leticia's extraordinary survival spread, the community rallied around her. Recognizing the enormous financial burden of her medical care, Candace Bush established a GoFundMe campaign to support Leticia's recovery journey. The campaign description acknowledged the reality of her situation. The road to recovery will be long, difficult, and costly. Funds raised would go toward medical bills, ongoing care, and the emotional support necessary for healing from such trauma. The response was immediate and heartfelt. As of the latest reports, the campaign had raised $13,600 from 254 donors, people moved by Leticia's story and eager to contribute to her recovery. Many donors left messages of support, expressing amazement at her survival and offering prayers for her continued healing. If you're watching this video and feel moved by Leticia's incredible fight for survival, consider how you might support victims of domestic violence in your own community. Whether through donations to organizations that provide emergency services, volunteering at shelters, or simply checking in on friends who may be in difficult relationships, your actions can make a difference. Share in the comments what resources exist in your area for domestic violence survivors, as this information could help someone watching right now. Beyond the physical recovery, Leticia faced the equally challenging process of emotional healing. Surviving such a violent attack by someone she had once been in a relationship with carries profound psychological impacts. Trauma specialists would likely be working with her to address post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and the complex emotions that come with such a life-altering experience. Throughout this process, Leticia's family remained her strongest advocates and support system. Her sister, Tika Ferguson, continued to speak on her behalf when necessary, ensuring that Leticia's voice was heard even when she couldn't physically be present. The family's suffering, as Ferguson had expressed in court, was ongoing. A ripple effect of violence that touched everyone connected to Leticia. The medical professionals treating Leticia often referred to her case as remarkable. With injuries that should have been fatal many times over, her survival defied medical explanation. Some attributed it to extraordinary medical care, others to Leticia's sheer will to live, and many in the community saw divine intervention at work. As Leticia progressed through her recovery, her story gained attention beyond Columbus, Georgia. Social media platforms like TikTok featured videos about her survival that accumulated millions of views. Commenters expressed amazement, with one writing, "Plain and simple, God said no. It's not her time, period. I praise God for His grace and mercy." For Leticia, each day of recovery represented both a victory and a challenge. Physical therapy, reconstructive surgeries, psychological counseling. These would become the new rhythm of her life. The road ahead remained long and difficult, but she had already overcome what many considered impossible. Her declaration, "I am still here," wasn't just a statement of survival, it was a testament to extraordinary human resilience in the face of unimaginable violence. For those currently in abusive relationships, Leticia's experience serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder that resources exist to help. National hotlines provide confidential support and connection to local services. Domestic violence organizations offer emergency shelter, legal advocacy, and ongoing support. Law enforcement agencies in many communities have specialized units trained to respond to domestic violence situations. Leticia's ongoing healing journey reminds us that survival extends far beyond the immediate medical crisis. Recovery from such trauma involves rebuilding not just the body, but also sense of safety, trust, and self. The path forward for survivors like Leticia involves countless small victories, each representing another step toward reclaiming their lives. As we conclude Leticia's story, I want to ask, what resources for domestic violence victims exist in your community? Have you or someone you know ever needed these services? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize warning signs or find help before violence escalates. If this video has impacted you, please hit the like button and share it with others. By spreading awareness about domestic violence and sharing stories of survival like Leticia's, we contribute to a culture where victims feel empowered to seek help, and communities understand the importance of supporting them. Remember, Leticia's most powerful message came in just 3 words: I am still here. For anyone facing abuse or its aftermath, these words offer both hope and a profound truth. Survival is possible, healing is possible, and no one has to face that journey alone.